So, coronavirus or COVID-19, I don't know which term is going to be more widely used in historic context, but either way, this event is the defining event really of this era um, of the early 2020s decade. I think it's something that's changed the world in many ways, or rather impacted the world, should say. Whether it makes permanent changes or not, who knows? But certainly, in terms of its impact on the world. I don't think any event in my lifetime has come close to the impact that this has had. I think of other big geopolitical events throughout my lifetime: the fall of communism in the late 80s, early 90s, um, 9/11 and the war on terror, the rise of social media, the Arabian Spring, and perhaps the rise of China. Those are arguably the major geopolitical events of my lifetime. But as an event, I think coronavirus is unsurpassed in terms of just how much it's affected the whole world in modern times. Um, and with that, I want to look a bit at the different attitudes that have arisen in society. I mean, around the world. I think this is becoming a very politicized issue in terms of how people feel it should be addressed. Um, so I came across a report earlier, I think it was in Al Jazeera, and it was talking about how protesters, various cities around the world, are now um, responding uh, to restrictions to particularly COVID vaccines. As an example, 3,500 people were protesting in Sydney. There was some violence. Police were attacked. In Athens, protesters threw petrol bombs. In Paris, there was demonstrations against President Macron's proposed COVID passports. There's been protests in London in a similar vein, and in other British cities. So this is something that's, and those are just some examples. I'm sure there's various protests in different particular contexts around the world. Um, I know there's been protests against Bolsonaro in Brazil. That's also for other political factors. But I have long believed that this pandemic has spawned two extremes, and one extreme, as I see it, and I accept that this will be maybe a taboo video because of its nature, but I'm just putting it out there because it's just something for people to think about. One extreme is those conspiracy theorists, by which I mean people who go to the extent of even questioning if there is a pandemic, and they literally believe that it's all some big plot by a collective world government or the Illuminati or some other force to keep people in control. One of the theories that comes out is a form of population control. The anti-vaxxer lobby is particularly adept at pushing these sort of conspiracy theories, which in my opinion is very reckless and frankly selfish. I actually think that these sort of conspiracy theories are based on an extreme form of libertarianism. That is to say, because there's been restrictions and we need to fight back, we need to reclaim our freedom. Um, but they're kind of, if they take the view that it's all some big plot or there is no pandemic, it's easier, I think, for them to justify to themselves the attitude that they're taking. Rather, there is a pandemic and people have died, and governments are taking these responses. Now, I want to be clear about this. I am not talking about everyone who's critical of government responses. That is not what I'm saying, because there is various schools of thought on what is the best approach. In terms of the actual case studies, in terms of the actual evidence from country to country, state to state, region to region, over what works and what doesn't, there isn't a consensus actually. There's differing results um, in terms of the rise in cases, in terms of what's working, what isn't. For example, in Europe, Sweden took a pretty laid back approach in terms of the restrictions that other European countries were facing. And at the time they'd done that, they had quite a low number of cases, but later on, their cases went up. So, a lot of people in Europe say, well, the Swedes got this wrong. In Britain, one of the main criticisms of the Johnson government was it was too slow to impose lockdowns, and that's why some would say we have one of the highest death tolls in the world. Now, it has to be said that's among official death tolls. It stands at 128,000 plus officially in the UK. Certainly, in many other countries, the actual tolls would be a lot higher. So, formally the UK is it sounds very crude to talk about rankings, but formally we're fifth or sixth highest death toll in the world. I think Peru or Mexico has surpassed us recently. But there will be many countries where the death toll is a lot higher than that officially reported. Certainly India comes to mind. And I think that even the conservative figures will show that millions have died from this thing. Um, so I just can't understand how anyone could say with a straight face that it's all a TV virus. This is one that I've heard, or it's all fake. I mean, to me, that's extreme because it's just ignoring the reality, but it's also very insensitive to people who've lost loved ones, or indeed who themselves are have been hospitalized by the more virulent forms of the virus, the more intense forms of the virus, which I understand cause a huge amount of discomfort. Um, so that's one extreme. But I also believe there's another extreme, which is a school of thought that we should have never ending restrictions. So in the UK right now, this is a growing issue. As of, I think it was the 19th of July, we had so called Freedom Day. Now, one of the biggest criticisms that can be made of the British government is the mixed messaging and mixed messaging from the cabinet itself, with the Prime Minister saying one thing and then other ministers saying something else. Um, I've got a mouth ulcer, so that's why I'm kind of yeah, touching my lip that way, it's a little bit painful. But basically, you have Boris Johnson making these grand promises and then other ministers kind of contradicting them. Grant Chap said he would be totally comfortable with continued restrictions on public transport. Up here in the northeast of England, the Tyne and Wear Metro is continuing to impose mask wearing, but buses, as I understand it, are not. I have several masks, mementos of this great pandemic. This one, which I can't stand, it's very itchy, kind of a basic clinical mask. And then these two Velcro ones. I think the Velcro might be nylon. This is kind of a nice design. This is just a basic one. I much prefer wearing these because this thing is just itchy. It's uncomfortable. But even with these, I find them uncomfortable. I mean, I'll just show you. I can still talk with it. I assume you can hear me clearly. Um, But I find that a little hard to breathe. Um, it might be because I quit smoking earlier this year, so I'm still having some of the effects of that. But with these masks, I'll remove it now. With these masks, it's one of those things with the pandemic. I think it's one of the most potent symbols of a change in our lives. I mean, in the Far East, mask wearing is relatively normal because of the high pollution in a lot of Asian cities. But in Western Europe and in North America, it's certainly not something that we're used to. Even now, I think a lot of people just don't like it. I was reading another report about a restaurant owner who asked that people continue wearing masks, and apparently he's had a lot of abuse. Now, that's wrong. As a business owner, he has every right to make a risk assessment in his own business. However, the other extreme, as I see it, is this idea that we have never ending restrictions, including mask wearing. I mean, I think legally and morally, the more people who are vaccinated, the fewer arguments there really are for continuing to impose restrictions. Frankly, at this point, I do think we need to really, really be looking at a way out because the effects in terms of travel restrictions, the effects in terms of mental health, the effects in terms of other illnesses and conditions being overshadowed. the effects on the economy and business, all of these things are not trivial. And with all due respect to medical personnel, medical commentators, their only focus really is on the health side of things. You know, they aren't thinking about people's businesses. They're not thinking about other health aspects. Um, so a responsibility of a government is to look at all these things. And I don't think that new variants is justification for having no end in sight. And if we look at the mortality rate at the height of the pandemic last year, 8 to 900 people were dying a day, and that was really, really bad. Each of those is someone's relative. And as it stands now, the death toll is in two figures. In some areas, it is rising, but I am not sure that new variants is a justification for never-ending restrictions. And I do fear serious social unrest if this continues, particularly when the Prime Minister is given these grand promises that are then, keep being backtracked. I mean, government ministers and medical professionals said that vaccines will be the way out of this. Well, most of Britain is now vaccinated. I'm due my second vaccination very soon. In fact, I got an NHS message saying that I can reschedule it for an even earlier date from the one I'd scheduled it for, which I will probably take up. It was a Moderna jab I got. It had slight pain, but no other effects. Um, so, people who are blasé about mask wearing, it's, oh, I've no problem with it. It should continue without an end in sight. They're ignoring the fact that there were clear promises that the more people who were vaccinated, the vaccinations would be the way out of this. So, as much as I strongly, strongly disagree with the conspiracy theorists, I think this sort of thing will fuel their narrative. They'll say it's a totalitarian scheme to keep us all under control, which I don't agree with, but it will fuel their narrative. And frankly, I think there's something wrong with someone who just wants to wear these things without end in sight. I don't know about, anyone watching this, but I find them uncomfortable. I'll be pleased to see the back of them. And I particularly sympathize with people who might have legitimate reasons for not wearing them. I'm thinking of people with asthma, like serious asthma, people with who perhaps are rape survivors, or they've had some other ordeal where breathing was a factor in the ordeal, or other reasons. This one size fits all, like oh, you can't come in if you're not wearing a mask. I think it should be open-minded and understanding of people who have legitimate reasons, because I do fear they're being stigmatized. I'm not saying that applies to me, but um, yeah, it's those two extremes. It's the one extreme of those who just deny that there's anything going on, and then the other extreme of those who want no end in sight. They just want perpetual restrictions. Oh, we've got new variants. Let's keep us locked down forever. That is absolutely an Orwellian vision. We are a free nation and we do need to look to an end of this thing. We really, really do. Because the impact it's had on day to day life has been profound. And I really believe at this point, with more people vaccinated, with the majority vaccinated, in fact, there's really no legal or moral argument to have never ending restrictions. That doesn't mean I endorse, like I say, that other extreme. Let me know your thoughts. I have huge sympathy for people who've lost loved ones, and have huge sympathy for people who are suffering with the virus right now. But we cannot have a never-ending situation, and I don't see these as a normal thing. I think they're a potent symbol of the restrictions that we faced, and I think they have to go at some point. Personally, I will wear the mask in any shop that requests it because that's a risk assessment, but I don't wear it in like in open streets because that has never been mandated actually, at least not with the easing of lockdown. I wear it in shops at request, but I really do think that we have to look to an end of this thing. I really do. Let me know your thoughts.